Ashes of the prairie rocks, 700 words. The wind that day blew dust across the high prairie, warm for late autumn but dry as old bone. Clara tightened her shawl and turned back toward the cabin, but she knew even before stepping inside that her husband wasn't coming back. His rifle was gone. So was the map. The oats off the sack vanished from the root cellar. He had taken the good horse and, most damning of all, left no note, just the door creaking on its leather hinges in the wind. 3 days passed before Clara buried the rest of the salted pork to keep the coyotes off. She lit a fire but didn't bother to cook. There was no point miles east, under a sky streaked with purple dusk. Martha stared at the hollow where her husband's body should have been. The ground had been disturbed. He hadn't died from cholera like he claimed. No, he'd faked his death to get free of her. The sack of coin was gone, and so were the bullets. Farther south still, Eliza carried the weight of her decision like a wet wool cloak. Her husband had traded her. She hadn't understood the details until he left with a group of traders, his laugh echoing behind him, as she stood in a stranger's camp. She was to be someone's wife now, against her will. That was 2 nights ago. She hadn't slept since. Each of these women, born to the illusion of safety and Christian virtue, found themselves stripped of protection, alone, not in the wilderness but at its mercy, in a land that did not welcome them, nor forgive their ignorance. Clara packed only what she could carry: a kitchen knife, a Bible with pages missing, a small blue stone from her mother's grave. She knew she would die if she stayed, and likely die if she left, but dying while standing felt better than dying on her knees. Martha took her husband's old boots and followed the tracks he'd left heading west. She had no plan, only the bitter taste of betrayal and the burning need to know why. A rifle across her back, she walked into the wind. Eliza didn't run. She waited, she listened, and when her chance came, she took it, smashing the firewood axe through her captor's shinbone and running into the dark. Barefoot and wild-eyed, blood on her arms and face. They did not know each other yet. They did not know they were heading toward the same fate or the same redemption. 2 days later, a Lakota hunting party spotted the first one. Clara lay beside a frozen creek, shivering, whispering her mother's hymn with cracked lips. The riders didn't speak English, but they saw the dying woman, and something in her eyes made them stop. One of them dismounted. He offered her water. She recoiled, but the thirst overpowered fear. Another day's ride north. Martha stood rifle raised atop a ridge, prepared to go out fighting. The Lakota men did not raise weapons. They approached with open hands, watching her as one might a wounded wolf. She did not lower the rifle, but she let them speak. Something in her heart cracked open. Eliza collapsed near their winter camp, her feet raw, her mind racing. She was brought in unconscious. The elder women surrounded her, washed her wounds, and placed beads in her hair to protect her dreams. When she woke, she screamed and sobbed, but she was not chained. 3 women, 3 paths, 1 nation. The Lakota did not ask where they came from. They asked who they were now, and that would take time to answer. The crossing, the morning sun spilled gold across the prairie, catching the frost like a million tiny stars. Clara woke stiff and cold in the shelter of the Lakota camp. The scent of sage and pine mingled with the smoke of the fire, and distant voices whispered in a language she did not yet understand. She blinked against the light, unsure if she was dreaming or alive. Beside her, a man sat watching the flames. His skin bronzed like leather, his eyes dark and steady. He was dressed in buckskin and feathers, his hair braided and falling over one shoulder. Clara wanted to run, but her legs were weak, her spirit broken. The man spoke softly, his words gentle, though she did not grasp their meaning. His name was Matto Bear, and something in his voice steadied her trembling heart. He held out a small bowl of water, and though she hesitated, thirst won over fear. Across the camp, Martha sat on a log, her rifle laid carefully beside her. She had stayed silent for days, watching the Lakota as they prepared for the hunt. They were fierce and proud, moving with the surety of those who knew the land, like the backs of their hands. A woman approached her, small and strong, with dark eyes full of quiet kindness. She handed Martha a braided pouch filled with dried meat and berries. Martha stared at the gift, unsure if it was an offering or a test. The woman's name was Wani, a spirit woman, and without speaking her language, she reached out to touch Martha's hand. The gesture was simple but heavy with meaning. You are not alone. Meanwhile, Eliza awoke in a different tipi, wrapped in soft blankets and watched over by elders whose wrinkles told stories of centuries. Her captors turned guardians had cared for her wounds, but her mind was a storm of memories and pain. One of the elders, a woman named Nita Bear, sat beside her and offered a small carved pipe. At first, Eliza refused, but the woman's patience was unyielding. She gestured to the sky, to the earth, then back to Eliza, as if explaining that healing came from more than just the body. Slowly, Eliza took the pipe and inhaled. The smoke filled her lungs, and though it did not erase the fear, it gave her a moment of calm. That night, the three women met around the central fire. They sat apart at first, wrapped in blankets and shadows, each still a prisoner of her own. Pastor Mato spoke gently to Clara, his words like a soothing balm, but she remained silent. Martha's gaze was fierce and guarded, and Eliza's hands trembled as she pulled her shawl tighter. It was Wanya who broke the ice, lifting a small drum and beginning a slow rhythm. The beat echoed through the night, a call to heart and spirit. The women listened, and something in the sound spoke to their broken souls. Days passed. The women learned to move with the camp, to listen, to watch. The Lakota taught them the names of plants and stars, how to track the buffalo, and the sacred ceremonies that honored the land and their ancestors. Clara found herself drawn to Mato's quiet strength, the way he listened without judgment and moved through the world with grace. He taught her to read the signs in the sky and to respect the earth beneath her feet. Martha's anger burned like a fierce fire, but Wanya showed her how to channel that fire into skill, archery, hunting, even medicine. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to crumble. Eliza, once silent and broken, found her voice in song and storytelling, encouraged by Nita's wisdom and kindness. The elders taught her the Lakota language and the power of names. She learned to honor herself anew. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the women stood together watching the camp prepare for a ceremony, the naming of new warriors. Clara whispered, "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged." Martha nodded, "Or strength I didn't know I had." Eliza smiled softly, "And love I never believed I deserved." The Lakota were more than their captors or protectors, they were the crossing between the lives they lost and the futures they could claim. And in that twilight, under a sky ablaze with stars, the three women took their first steps into a new world, one where love, justice, and hope were not just dreams but destinies waiting to be fulfilled. Red earth, new dawn. The prairie was waking, alive with the hum of early spring. Beneath a sky the color of slate, Clara, Martha, and Eliza moved through the village like shadows, learning to become light. Each day brought new lessons, not just in survival, but in trust, in belonging. For Clara, the earth beneath her feet was a strange friend. The red clay stained her hands, but she learned to read its cracks like an open book. Mato taught her how to track the buffalo, how to know when the wind would change, and how to listen for the whispers of the grass. It was in the quiet moments beside the river, watching the water ripple over stones, that Clara began to shed her grief. The sorrow that once weighed like a stone in her chest softened with each breath of open air. Mato was patient, never rushing her, always beside her like the steady pulse of the land itself. Martha, still fierce and guarded, found herself drawn to the rhythm of the hunt. Wanya was a skilled archer and healer, and she shared her knowledge with Martha with the grace of a sister. At first, Martha resisted her anger, a shield against pain, but as she learned to draw the bow, to blend into the prairie grasses, something inside her shifted. She realized that her strength was not just in holding a rifle or in surviving, but in trusting herself enough to move silently, to wait, and to aim true. The fire inside her burned not for revenge anymore, but for something new, something fierce and alive. Eliza's journey was the quietest but no less profound. The elders gathered around her, teaching her the stories of their people, tales of creation, of the sacred buffalo, of the spirit world. Nita's voice was like a river, flowing steady and deep, and with every story, Elisa found a part of herself she thought had been lost. She began to speak Lakota, first hesitantly, then with growing confidence. With the language came new understanding, not just of words, but of a worldview that honored balance, respect, and harmony. Eliza's voice returned through song and prayer, her spirit slowly weaving itself into the fabric of the tribe. One evening, the women gathered at the council fire, where the elders spoke of the coming buffalo junta, sacred ritual that sustained the people and tested their skills. The hunt was more than a practical task. It was a ceremony of life, death, and renewal. Mato invited Clara to join the hunt, a gesture that both honored and challenged her. Fear flickered inside her. She was no warrior, but she accepted, knowing that to remain still was to remain lost. The hunt was brutal and beautiful. The thundering hooves of buffalo filled the air, dust rising like ghosts above the prairie. Clara moved with the hunters, heart pounding, senses sharpened. She saw life and death in every motion, the precision, the respect, the sorrow. That night, as the tribe celebrated their success, Clara felt a strange new thing. Belonging. Martha, too, found herself at the center of the tribe's respect. Her skill with the bow grew, and with it, her sense of purpose. Wania stood beside her, proud and steady. A sister who had helped her find a new path. Eliza's songs rose into the cold night, weaving the stories of the Lakota with her own. The tribe listened, captivated by the strange voice from another world who had become their storyteller. She felt the weight of history settle on her shoulders, but also the promise of a new beginning. Yet, beneath the warmth of the firelight, shadows lingered. Each woman carried ghosts of husbands who had betrayed, of homes left behind, of futures stolen. One morning, Clara found a carving on a tree near the river symbol she did not recognize. Motto explained it was a warning. Settlers were moving closer, bringing guns and greed. The peace they'd found was fragile. Martha's anger stirred anew, but this time it was tempered by a fierce determination. The justice she sought was no longer personal vengeance but protection for her new family. Eliza prayed silently that the spirits would guide them through the coming storm. In the red earth of the Lakota land, the three women stood reborn. Their hearts once broken, now beat with a new purpose, love, justice, and hope intertwined like the braided ropes of the hunter's gear. The dawn was new, but the fight was far from over. Language of fire and snow. Winter came fast and fierce, wrapping the prairie in cold and silence. The once open grasslands were now white and vast, shadows stretching long beneath an iron sky. For Clara, Martha, and Eliza, the season was a test, just of endurance, but of the bonds they'd forged with each other and with the Lakota. The language barrier that had once felt like an impenetrable wall was now a bridge, forged through shared hardship and patient teaching. Clara sat beside Motto one evening, the wind howling outside their tipi as they passed a pipe back and forth. Motto was a man of few words, but in his silence, Clara found a deep comfort. He had begun to teach her the Lakota language, not just the words, but the poetry woven into them. Mitaku Oyazin, he said softly, all my relatives. Clara repeated the phrase clumsily, then smiled when Motto nodded approvingly. The phrase captured everything she was learning, the interconnectedness of all things, the respect for life that the Lakota lived by. It was a language of fire and snow, the fire of spirit and passion, the snow of endurance and patience. Martha had learned to speak more than just the words. She had begun to understand the unspoken language of the people, the quiet glances, the respectful distance, the moments of shared laughter in the bitter cold. Wanya was her guide, a steady presence through the long nights. One afternoon, as they prepared hides and shared stories beside the fire, Martha felt something she hadn't in years, a flicker of peace. It was fragile, like the thin ice forming on the creek, but it was there. Eliza's journey with language was more complicated. The trauma she carried made words sometimes stick in her throat, but Nita was patient, helping her with stories and songs, weaving Lakota teachings into the rhythms of her heart. Eliza discovered that language was not only a tool for communication but a way to heal wounds invisible to the eye. Through song, she began to release the pain that had held her captive. One night, as the northern lights danced overhead in waves of green and purple, the tribe gathered for a ceremony, the naming of new members. The air was filled with the smell of sweetgrass and burning cedar. The women watched as children were given Lakota names, each one chosen with care and meaning. The ceremony was both sacred and joyful, a declaration of identity and belonging. Motto turned to Clara and said her name would be Taina Maza, bronze knife. The name honored her strength and resilience. Wanya gave Martha the name Water, beautiful woman. Not for beauty of face, but for the beauty of spirit and courage. Nita named Eliza Otu, 1V, morning star, symbolizing new beginnings and hope in the darkest times. The names felt heavy with meaning, but they were gifts, a rebirth into this new world. As winter deepened, the harshness of the land tested them all. Food was scarce, and sickness crept into the camp. Yet, the community held fast. Each woman played a part. Clara learned to prepare herbal remedies. Martha helped tend the firewood and guard the camp, and Eliza sang healing songs, her voice a balm for aching hearts. One night, a blizzard howled like a wild beast. The wind rattled the tipi poles, and the cold seeped through every layer of clothing. Clara woke to find Motto gone, a message left in the snow, a warning. Settlers had been spotted near the edge of Lakota territory, and tensions were rising. Fear tightened in the women's chests, but it was mixed with something else. Resolve. They had been betrayed once before by the men who should have protected them. But here, among the Lakota, they had found a family, a purpose, and a way to fight back. Language was more than words, now it was a code of survival and resistance. The next day, they gathered around the council fire. Mato and the elders spoke of the coming conflict, of strategies to protect the land and people. Martha's hands clenched into fists. This time the fight would not be personal, but for justice. Elisa sang a haunting song, a prayer for peace and strength, while Clara prepared the herbs that would heal wounds yet to come. Winter was long and brutal, but beneath the snow lay the promise of spring, and in their hearts, the fire burned steady bright as the morning star. Ghosts of the wagon trail spring crept slowly over the prairie, melting the winter's harsh grip. The snow softened into mud, and the grass tentatively pushed through the thawed earth. But the past refused to stay buried beneath the fresh green shoots. For Clara, Martha, and Eliza, ghosts haunted the horizon, the ghosts of betrayals, lost homes, and broken promises. Clara stood on a rise overlooking the old wagon trail. It was a path she knew well, once traveled by settlers and soldiers alike. Now, it carried new dangers, familiar shapes moving in the distance. Armed men whose eyes burned with suspicion and greed. Her heart tightened. Mato stood silently beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He understood the unspoken weight she carried. "They come," he said quietly. "Not all will see peace here." Clara's mind drifted back to her husband, the man who had vanished without a word, leaving her to face the wilderness alone. She clenched her jaw. The betrayal still cut deep, but the anger was no longer a solitary flame. It was a fire shared with those who had taken her in. Martha was preparing the camp's defenses, teaching younger warriors how to track and outwit the settlers' patrols. Her hands, once trembling with rage and doubt, were steady now. Wanya watched her with pride. "You have become a true warrior," Wanya said softly, placing a hand on Martha's arm. "Your spirit is fierce, but your heart is wise." Martha nodded, but her eyes darkened. The memory of her husband's lies fueled her determination. She would not let history repeat itself. Eliza spent her days weaving stories of the past and present, creating songs that told the tale of 3 women who had crossed worlds. Her voice carried across the camp, a reminder of resilience and hope. The tribe listened, their hearts stirred by the strange woman who had become their morning star. But the settlers were coming closer, their intentions clear. One evening, as the camp gathered for council, Mato shared the troubling news. "They plan to take our lands," he said. "They do not understand the sacredness of this place." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then we must make them understand. Not with words alone, but with strength." The elders nodded, and plans were made. The women would stand alongside the warriors not as outsiders, but as protectors of their new home. The days that followed were tense. Scouts returned with reports of increasing numbers, of wagons loaded with weapons and supplies. The threat was real, and the camp prepared for the inevitable. One night, Clara dreamed of fire and smoke. She saw her old home reduced to ash, the faces of her former life disappearing in the flames. She woke with tears streaming down her cheeks, but Mato was there, holding her hand. "You are not alone," he whispered. Martha, too, wrestled with memories. She remembered the cold betrayal of her husband, the loneliness that had once threatened to consume her. But now, she had found a family, a purpose. She would fight for them. Eliza's songs grew louder, a rallying cry for the tribe. She sang of buffalo and spirits, of battles fought and won, of hope that could not be extinguished. The first clash came at dawn. The settlers moved like a storm, their guns flashing in the morning light. But the Lakota were ready, their knowledge of the land turning the tide. Martha's arrow found its mark, and Clara stood firm beside Mato, wielding a knife with unexpected skill. Eliza's voice rose above the chaos, singing a song of courage that bolstered the warriors' spirits. The battle was fierce, but the tribe held their ground. When the smoke cleared, the settlers retreated, their pride wounded but their resolve unbroken. That night, the camp celebrated, but the victory was tempered with sorrow. The cost had been high. Clara looked around at her new family, the faces lit by firelight, the smiles shadowed by loss. She realized that the past would always be a part of them, but it would not define them. Martha embraced Wanya, tears of relief and determination in her eyes. Eliza sang a quiet song, a prayer for those lost and those yet to come. The ghosts of the wagon trail still lingered. But the women were no longer haunted. They were the living proof of resilience, love, and justice, born from betrayal. Together, they had crossed from the ashes of their old lives into the red earth of a new dawn. The reckoning. The wind shifted coldly across the plains as the days shortened toward autumn. The dust of the last battle still clung to their clothes, but the tension was far from over. Clara, Martha, and Eliza had tasted victory, but now they faced the true test, justice. The settlers would not simply leave. They returned with promises and threats, seeking to divide and conquer. For the three women, it was personal. Their pasts and present collided in a storm of betrayal and retribution. Clara stood beneath the wide sky, her bronze knife gleaming in the fading light. Madhu was by her side, a silent pillar of strength. Together, they crafted a plan not for bloodshed, but for truth. The first step was gathering evidence. Clara recalled the journals and letters left behind by her husband, documents that revealed a conspiracy to cheat settlers and Lakota alike. With the help of Wania and Nita, the women began collecting testimony from both their people and disillusioned settlers. Martha took to the woods with a small band, intercepting supply wagons and freeing captives. Her arrow was swift and her resolve unbreakable. She became a shadow on the trail, a whisper of justice for those betrayed. Eliza traveled between camps, singing her stories and sharing news. Her voice was a weapon of hope and unity, weaving a tapestry of resistance across the plains. One crisp morning, a messenger arrived from the nearby fort, a request for parley. The settlers claimed they sought peace. Clara, Martha, and Eliza rode to the meeting place with Mato and the elders, their hearts steeled but wary. The fort was a stone sentinel, cold and imposing. Inside, the officers spoke with practiced politeness, offering treaties that looked good on paper but concealed greed and deception. Clara stood, voice clear and unwavering, presenting the evidence of lies and theft. She demanded recognition of Lakota sovereignty and reparations for the wrongs committed. Martha, fierce-eyed, detailed the raids and abuses suffered by their people and the settlers, who had dared to break their word. Eliza's song filled the holla, haunting melody that spoke of land, spirit, and justice. The officers were silent, moved despite themselves. The parley ended without agreement, but the women had made their voices heard. Back in the camp, the atmosphere was charged with both hope and uncertainty. Clara found herself reflecting on the journey from the ashes of betrayal to this moment of standing tall among her new family. Mato took her hand in his, and she felt a quiet peace settle in her soul. Martha was restless, pacing beneath the stars. "We can't wait for their justice," she said. "We must take it." Eliza shook her head gently. "Justice without honor is only revenge. We fight for balance." Their debates were heated but rooted in deep respect. They knew that the future depended on wisdom as much as strength. Then came the night. When the settlers returned, this time with fire and steel, the camp braced itself. Women, children, elders all, prepared for what might come. Clara stood beside Mato, ready to defend their home. Martha knocked an arrow, her breath steady. Eliza sang softly, a prayer for courage. The battle that night was fierce and brutal. Flames licked the tipis, gunshots echoed through the dark, and cries of pain and defiance filled the air. But the Lakota fought with the fury of the land itself. The women, no longer outsiders, stood shoulder to shoulder with their people. Clara's bronze knife found its mark more than once. Martha's arrows flew true. Eliza's voice carried over the chaos, inspiring those around her. When dawn broke, the settlers were driven back, battered and broken, but the cost was high. The women mourned their losses, their grief a heavy cloak. Yet, in the ashes of that reckoning, they found a new strength. They had faced betrayal, abandonment, and violence and emerged not as victims, but as warriors of justice and love. The frontier was still wild and uncertain, but Clara, Martha, and Eliza had carved a place where their hearts could finally rest. They had found not only love among the Lakota but a powerful justice born of unity and courage. The long winter ends. The prairie thawed slowly beneath a pale sun as winter gave way to spring once more. The land breathed new life, and so did Clara, Martha, and Eliza. The long season of struggle, the harsh winters of betrayal, war, and loss was ending, replaced by a fragile hope that stretched across the horizon like the first green shoots breaking through frozen soil. The Lakota camp was alive with renewal. Tipis were repaired, children laughed in the open fields, and elders offered blessings for the coming growing season. For the three women, This season marked not just a change in weather but a turning point in their lives. Clara stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The wind tugging at her dark hair braided with feathers Mato had given her. Mato approached. Quietly, the steady presence she had come to rely on through storm and calm. Spring always returns, he said softly in Lakota, bringing new life and new paths. Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words ripple through her like a healing balm. She thought of the journey that had brought her here from the cold betrayal of her husband, through captivity and fear, to this moment of belonging and strength. Mato's hand found hers, and she squeezed it gently. The weight of past sorrows lifting. Martha was nearby, teaching the children how to track the deer through the budding forest. Her eyes shone with a fierce pride, not just as a hunter or warrior, but as a teacher, a protector of the future. Wania stood beside her, smiling softly. "You have become the woman we always knew you could be," she said. Martha smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sun. Eliza sat with Nita and the elders around the council fire, her voice rising. In song, her Lakota had blossomed into fluency, her storytelling a bridge between worlds. Through her songs, the stories of women like them cast out, betrayed, and reborn found a place in the heart of the tribe. That night, the camp gathered for a ceremony under a sky sprinkled with stars. The elders spoke of balance, of the strength found in unity, and of the land that held them all. Clara, Martha, and Eliza were honored not only as survivors, but as daughters of the Lakota warriors who had fought with heart and wisdom. As the firelight danced on their faces, Mato stepped forward and spoke in a voice both proud and gentle. "They have become part of us. Their journeys are our stories now." Clara looked around at the faces of the tribe. Her tribe band felt a deep peace she had never known. The long winter of their lives, both literal and spiritual, was ending. They had crossed through betrayal and pain into a new dawn, one built on love, justice, and community. The frontier was still wild, and the future uncertain, but the three women stood ready, together, with the rising sun painting the prairie gold. Clara, Martha, and Eliza stepped forward not as broken women but as whole, powerful spirits, forever bound to the land and people who had given them a second chance. And in that moment, the long winter ended.